Yes, thank you. My name is Edwin Powell Hubble. I was born in Marshville, Missouri in 1889. My project that I began working on not until 1919 was to prove something I had put in a dissertation when I was in college, and that was to discover how far spiral nebulas were outside of the Milky Way. Specifically focusing on different types of stars in order to do that, because I believe that these spiral nebulas were actually their own galaxies outside of our galaxies. So what we were trying to do and find is exactly that. We were trying to find the distance for these galaxies to see that if this distance was in fact further than the size of the Milky Way galaxies, then these galaxies must be independent and on their own. We did that specifically by focusing on the Cepheid variable star types, and this is because they provided the most reliable distances for us in our research, and that's exactly what we found. We found that these galaxies were, hundreds of thousands of light years further outside of our Milky Way galaxy, and that they were in fact independent. So yes, where did this project occur? In 1919, as I mentioned earlier, I used the Hale Observatory on Mount Wilson near Pasadena. Here is where, at that time, the world's largest telescope was functioning and being used. After I studied for many years, or several years, I should say, searching for these Cepheids in a specific type of specific galaxy that you can see in the northern hemisphere with the naked eye. Actually, I succeeded in measuring the distances of these galaxies from our Earth and our Milky Way galaxy, theorizing roughly around 800,000 light years. And this distance proved that they were independent galaxies outside of our own galaxy. Yes, good question. Other significant events that were happening around that time is actually in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was being signed, which, if I remember correctly, officially ended World War I. In that very next year, in 1920, Prohibition began. And I also believe that was the first year that women began to vote in the presidential election, because the ratification of the 19th Amendment happened during that. Yes, there were several people that were involved in the project. Specifically, though, my assistant, Milton L. Humason, was a part of the project, and he was a large part in helping me analyze these spectrum that we recorded, these light spectrums. These spectrums had specific lines in them that give lots of information to astrophysicists. Some of them that myself and Mr. Milton discovered was that not only could we decide the chemical composition from these light spectrums, but we could also denote what the wavelengths were doing. So one thing that we were not expecting to discover was that the wavelengths were actually growing longer. They were lengthening, and the spectrums were being shifted to the red sides of the spectrums that we had recorded. Because of that, the galaxies were actually discovered to be moving away from us and expanding outward. My role in the project, as you know, is I played a quite major role. We were initially trying to discover something that I had theorized before. However, one of the big things was I discovered the association between both the velocity and the distance of these galaxies, is later termed the Hubble effect. So essentially, the further out or removed galaxies are, in proportional to the other galaxies, the faster they are moving. So the velocity is proportional to the distance of the galaxies. Also, providing that the universe is constantly expanding outward. My mathematical discovery backs me up as well, which I found later, which is termed the Hubble's law. Not the most practical name, if you ask me. Oh yes, our discoveries definitely impacted the physics community to a wide extent. This discovery I made impacted the physics world to the point that the Big Bang Theory is what it began to prove, and it began to have supporting data that the universe actually had an origin, and that it wasn't a standstill. Later, it even convinced Albert Einstein to believe that the universe did have a beginning, rather than the original belief of his steady state model. Later, as people began to require more proof for the Big Bang Theory, this discovery led to the discovery of background radiation by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, who won the Nobel Prize in 1978 for physics. This discovery of background radiation was even more proof that the Big Bang Theory did exist. So yeah. Yes, that is correct. In 1922, I did publish a astrophysical journal on the study of galactic nebula, and I'll tell you exactly what some of the subdivisions were of galactic and non-galactic nebula, actually. And yes, so I discovered through these years of studying that non-galactic nebula are separated into spiral, globular, elongated, and irregular nebula. However, galactic nebula are divided into planetary and diffuse. By looking at these different discoveries, we begin to see even more the complexity of our universe. Thank you very much for all the questions.